Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at Pride in New Haven. My name is Elliot Olson. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am the Trans, Intersex, and Non-Binary Program Officer at the New Haven Pride Center. So before we begin, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are hosting this event. The New Haven Pride Center was founded and operates on the traditional lands of the Mohegan, Mashantucket, Pequot, Shattuck, Pawcatucket, Niantic, and Quinnipiac peoples. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor the Native people whose lands you occupy and the history of the place you are in. You can learn more about native lands at native-land.ca. So, today's event is part of Pride New Haven, which will be taking place September 12th through the 19th. We hope to see you at many more of the events before the week is over. If you want to check out the full schedule, you can go to newhavenpridecenter.org/2021 Pride. We also want to thank our amazing Pride co-producer, Gotham City Empire Entertainment Group, and to all of our presenting sponsors, the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, Stop and Shop, the City of New Haven Department of Arts, Culture and Tourism, the State of Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development, Gilead, and Healthcare Advocates International. Lastly, before we start, I just want to thank all of you for being here today and helping us celebrate Pride. All of the work of Pride is done thanks to the tireless efforts of the staff, more than 100 volunteers, and all of our incredible artists and speakers and panelists. If you are feeling extra generous, we welcome donations to support the incredible work of Pride and the New Haven Pride Center in large. You can make a donation online at newhavenpridecenter.org or on our Venmo or Cash App. So now I will hand it over to our amazing moderator, Kirill Staklo, to introduce our panelists and get rolling.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Thanks, Elliot. Thanks, New Haven Pride Center. Happy New Haven Pride and really excited to be here. I'm gonna introduce our panelists who are incredible. We are so lucky to have all these awesome people here today. A bit about myself. I'm Kirill Staklo. I'm an intersex guy. I'm a trans intersex guy. I am an intergender trans guy, and I've done intersex and trans advocacy in Connecticut and internationally for the last approximately 6 years. All of these people are people that I really look up to, that I'm going to be speaking with today. And hopefully today's conversation is going to shed some light for people who are interested in learning how to support intersex communities better, learn more about the amazing activists that are out there whose work you can follow and support and bolster, and really learn more about what it's like, to organize as an intersex person, both within the LGBTQI+ community and also outside of it too. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce people one at a time. So our first panelist is Hans Lindahl. Hans is a writer, comics artist, and creator known for accessible and colorful commentary on intersex issues. While serving as communications director for Interact, Hans's groundwork and digital strategies played a pivotal role in passing and advancing California legislation denouncing genital surgeries on intersex infants. Hans's YouTube videos on intersex topics have been translated into 3 languages. As 1/3 of the zine collective Neighborhood Comics, Hans enjoys telling stories from unique corners of contemporary trans, non-binary, and intersex life. Hi, Hans. Super excited to have you here.
Thank you.
Fanboying.
Jazzed to be here. My goodness.
Our next panelist is Marissa Adams. Marissa is a queer intersex woman and advocate. She's been involved in intersex advocacy since 2014 when she joined Interact's youth program. Since then, she has talked and written about her intersex journey, including what it is like to be intersex and experiencing an eating disorder. She's currently the communications and support coordinator at Interconnect Support Group, which is a youth advocate at Interact, Advocates for Intersex Youth, and she also serves on the board of Intersex and Faith. Lots of hats. She advocates for intersex bodily autonomy and increased access to gender-affirming medical and mental health care. Hi, Marissa.
Hi, thank you so much for
have you here.
having me. So good to see everyone.
Yeah. Our next panelist is Katerina Azhdaji. She is an LGBTQ plus and Romani rights activist currently living in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She's a single mother of a teenager and owns a small business as a contract refugee services coordinator, helping recently displaced people gain access to such services as English classes, work placement, training programs, and many others. She spends her personal time serving on the board of several local nonprofits and leftist political and labor organizations, including as an editor for a socialist newspaper called The Red Wheel. She's an intersex awareness speaker and has spoken on a number of other topics, ranging from acrylic painting to 21st century Marxist theory. She enjoys reading, writing, both prose and poetry, and spending time with friends and family. Hi, Katerina. And next is Bria Brown-King. Bria uses they and she pronouns. They're the director of engagement at Interact Advocates for Intersex Youth. They work to build and cultivate relationships with stakeholders and raise awareness about intersex issues. Bria started doing intersex advocacy work as an intern with Interact, where they published articles for the ACLU, Teen Vogue, and Them magazine. They were also the first openly intersex person to speak about intersex issues on the steps of the Supreme Court. Bria also serves as an advisory board member for multiple organizations representing intersex people nationally and internationally. Hi, Bria.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, Dr. Angela Carter is a queer, transgender, and genderqueer naturopathic primary care physician, midwife, sexual assault examiner, and trans health advocate. They currently work as the program director for Oregon's Measure 110 implementation management. They've lectured extensively at medical schools and conferences nationally and internationally on trans and non-binary healthcare. Dr. Angela has the privilege of providing physical and mental health care and hormone therapy to over 1,000 trans and non-binary community members over their last decade in practice. They founded, then clinically directed, the Marie Equicent Institute from 2014 to 2019. Dr. Angela has organized and volunteered with the Portland LGBTQ Meaningful Care Conference, the National Trans HIV Testing Day events, the C3PO Houseless Villages, Outside In Clinic, and Mercy and Wisdom Clinic. They've volunteered with the Queer Dome psychedelic support community. In this capacity and others, they've been honored to sit with many people experiencing psychedelic journeys. They currently serve as vice chair of the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, volunteer as a supervisor with Fireside Project Psychedelic Support Line, and they chair the OHSU Transgender Health Program Community Advisory Board. They're a dirt-worshipping witch. They enjoy mycological forays into the Oregon woods, making botanical medicine, crocheting unique sculptural hats, and the company of cats. So we are all here. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the center for having all of us. We're going to get this show on the road. So a little bit of housekeeping for anybody who's watching. Please feel free to post your comments in whatever medium you're watching this in, and I will direct the comments to our panelists. If we get a deluge of comments / questions, there's not necessarily a guarantee that all of the questions are going to be answered, but we are going to be sending out, or the Pride Center is going to be sending out some awesome resources where you can educate yourself further on intersex issues in general and also how to support the intersex community, both in Connecticut and elsewhere. So let's start this conversation. I think that the first thing that comes to mind for me, right, is like, so in Connecticut right now, it's Pride. Everyone's talking about being out. Everyone's talking about being proud. I feel like within the broader LGBTQ plus community, we don't really talk a lot about what it means to be out as intersex. And that's a very unique kind of positionality to have. So I think I want to start there, in the spirit of pride and outness, and kind of engaging with that. What is y'all's kind of visions and experiences been with that, and how does that compare to being out as anything else? So people can speak up, or I can call on people, like we're in middle school. Whatever works for people. But yeah.
I'm happy to start. Can y'all hear me good? Perfect.
Yep.
Well, I came out as intersex in 2019, so fairly recently. And to me, being out was really about finally being able to accept my truth, because I knew that I was intersex since I was maybe 13 or so, but I never really fully embraced it until 2019. Also, I came out as queer and non-binary. And I think that something that I noticed was that when I came out as queer and intersex was that I instantly felt, this sense of community and finally like belonging to a community. I think the biggest difference was that my connections to other intersex people was mostly happening virtually. Being out about being intersex to me means that I'm prepared for people to have no idea what that even means. Whereas I think that most people are more familiar with, being queer and being non-binary.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely super relate to that. I came out as intersex after I came out as trans. And I don't know why there was like a lot of stigma and shame for me around it in a way that other things weren't. And then immediately, I don't know if y'all have the same experience, like those of y'all who identify also as trans or non-binary, but immediately people were like, oh, so that's why you're trans. So now we have a reason that we can apply to this. And it's a very easy trap to fall into where you're like, yeah, maybe. No, it exists separately. What are other people's like thoughts and experiences around like being out?
For me, it was coming from a community that doesn't handle any of the LGBTQIA stuff well. We'll put it that way. I feel like I spent a lot of time trying to justify myself. And then when I finally transitioned, I just kind of stopped caring. It was like, you know what, this is part of who I am, and just because you don't understand it, just because our community has certain viewpoints on certain topics that are dated, I'm not going to feel ashamed of that anymore. And I think that was a really big jumping point for me. Like, there were people who knew, and I think something that some of you have probably experienced is there's a lot of information about intersex that doesn't necessarily contradict itself, but like because it's a spectrum, people assume that everyone is this one thing, and as opposed to it being an umbrella. And so, for example, with my condition, I was never supposed to be able to have kids, and I'm a mom now, and so just the time spent explaining is not something I miss.
Sure. Yeah. Also, shout out. Love having fellow Rom people on panels. I think this is the first time I've had that privilege. Usually being like alone. Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts?
I have thoughts. Probably too many thoughts. I mean, what I
No
say
such
sometimes
thing.
is, I think broadly what I would say is a difference is that if you think about a coming out framework, a lot of intersex people don't have any luxury of timing or like even being able to calculate how or when that happens, because often people in your life, parents, doctors, whoever knows even before you do and has that power over you in some cases. So it's really different, and it makes me really side-eye things like, when people talk about looking for things like, sex brain differences or trans brain differences or things like that. It's like, come on, like, we know this, like, don't do this. And I think on a personal level, having been, just finding out about being intersex as a teenager and having had that kind of unearthed for me and not having had any of that, timing in the coming out, although, subsequently with peers, and there are always choice points. But I think having had that experience has made me, in some ways resentful of even the framework of coming out. Like, these are facts of our realities, and it's frustrating to feel like the burden is on the individual who's experiencing that, who is the different person based on the mainstream. And when I talk about being out as far as like putting effort into activism or education, that sort of outness, I feel like almost feels more like a public service or a necessity to me, as opposed to something that is like validating my own physical reality. It's frustrating and complicated.
Thank you, Hans. It's very relatable as well. Angela, Marissa, do y'all thoughts?
Yeah, I can go. I think being out means different things for different people. Everyone might have their own kind of idea about what it means for themselves, but for me, it meant first, it just meant connecting with other intersex people, because I kind of denied the truth about myself for so long. So my first experience with being out was really meeting other intersex people and talking about it with them, and kind of coming to terms with my identity. I would say it's hard to be out if you don't even know the truth about yourself. For me, it was hidden from me. I was identified at birth as intersex, and of course, I wasn't told the truth about myself for years, and so I really had to come to terms with myself and understand what it meant for me before I could kind of be out about it, because I didn't know what it meant for me. And it was finally after I really educated myself on my history and really, I had to really understand it for myself. And I think being out for me now really means advocacy and connecting with others and providing support to people who used to be in, or whose place I used to be in, with kind of trouble accepting themselves. And now it really does mean advocacy for me, trying to change kind of how things are, especially with medical management of intersex right now. So yeah, for me, it's really about advocacy. And I would definitely say, for sure, you need to know kind of the truth. You need to know yourself before you can be out. So for me, that was kind of the first step.
Thank you. Dr. Angela?
Hi. I think for me, coming out and being out has been a process of, am I enough? Am I trans enough? Am I intersex enough to actually claim this identity? I come from being a person who has gone through medicalized training. I'm a doctor, so I have had these ideas, these notions of what intersex is inserted. That is a very, siloed, medicalized idea of what intersex is, very categorized. And so I had that definition in my process of coming out and felt like, oh, I can't claim this. This is, I'm not enough. And I'm really grateful to my patients, actually, who just by being themselves and being, the beautiful manifestation of whatever their gender may have been, I was able to say, oh, you are a beautiful representation of an intersex human, and I can see now that I can also be that. And so my coming out, I didn't get a diagnosis until I was in my mid-20s, diagnosis a definition. So, but I knew before then, just because my body was different. But I didn't feel I could claim it for a long time. I really didn't claim it until around 2019 as well. And came out as trans and non-binary before I came out as intersex. So yeah, it's been an interesting experience of trying to find community the last couple of years with community so hard to find. In some ways, in other ways, it's been so much easier to connect. But yeah, I I think the out part is for me really crucial because I can be a representation to the medical community of what an intersex person can be, is, and um, just being myself. I can share that and destigmatize the experience in general in my interactions with other medical professionals.
That's awesome. Thank you. It looks like we may have lost Katerina. Hopefully she gets back. Yay, Zoom events. Oh, there you are. Good. So yeah, I want to move on to the next thing. I think where I want to go from here, kind of logically, is since, right, this is in the context of like a broader like intersex, trans, non-binary programming thing. What have y'all's experiences been in terms of either assumptions that people make or like wrong understandings of what it means to be intersex and how that kind of overlaps with trans experiences, right? So like, for example, one of the things that I share with people a lot is that the majority of intersex people are cis. And people's minds get blown because people think that like, if you're intersex, you're automatically trans because, but there's a lot of really, really interesting myths around that. And I guess I'm kind of curious, like, what have your experiences been as an advocate? And specifically in like overlapping with trans advocacy, what does that look like? What have you had to fight for? What have your supports looked like? And in particular, like, what can trans people in particular do to advance intersex rights and intersex advocacy? You know, and like, what would you want people to understand around that overlap, if there is any, in your opinion?
I mean, I can certainly volunteer some thoughts. It's a big question. So is there maybe like one branch of that to go off on first?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, whatever comes to your mind. This is more of like a conversation, I think, and like we can share what comes to mind for each of us.
Well, I guess maybe one recent thought that could be grounding. I mean, there was an article that we worked on a while ago about all of the anti-trans bills, all of the attacks on gender-affirming healthcare, and how insidious that is, but how it's frustrating to see those being talked about as only anti-trans bills when really a lot of these are broader attacks on any kind of sex and gender diversity for the scary fascist agenda that we're seeing. And it's frustrating because it's like you can't talk about these things even only under one letter because it goes so much broader than that. But I think intersex and trans solidarity is so necessary and so important. Like, there's times when I feel a little frustrated, but there's also times when I remember like there's also such a history there. Like, we face so many of the same issues, and it does really motivate me whenever I get to work with trans folks, with trans groups, on looking at any of these issues. Like, in the healthcare space, it's definitely like I feel like things that are professing to be trans competent are still often very far off from being intersex competent. But I'm optimistic. There's lots of overlap.
Definitely. Bria, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, happy to jump in. I see intersex as being centered around so many other movements like children's rights and trans rights, and something that intersex activist and co-founder of the Intersex Justice Project, Saifa, does a beautiful job of speaking about is how intersex justice or justice for intersex people is really about justice for all people, right? Especially within the broader LGBTQ plus community. We're talking about people's rights to bodily integrity and autonomy. And, we see overlaps with reproductive rights and the conversations happening about the abortion ban in Texas, and really seeing intersex people being left out of those conversations. And, as I mentioned earlier, children's rights to participate in conversations happening about their bodies, LGBT rights, letting people know that we're, not disordered and that there's nothing wrong with us and we don't need to be fixed, right? And trans rights, our dignity is being threatened kind of on a daily basis, and our livelihoods are being stolen with legislation like the anti-trans sports bills that also affect intersex people as well. And I honestly think it's time that, I think it's past time for us to start reimagining gender and realize that our current beliefs about gender are really deeply rooted in patriarchy, transphobia, misogyny, and racism. Thank you.
Yep. Also, thanks for shouting out Saifa, another one of my huge people that I look up to. Yeah, any other thoughts from people? I guess, like, since we're talking about, right, trans solidarity being important in intersex advocacy, and you're touching on a lot of legislation that also impacts intersex folks. We could go in the direction that, like, Bria was just heading in, where it's like, oh, well, like, what even constitutes, you know, being intersex, and aren't all people just a combination of sex characteristics? And that's the direction we could be heading in. But I think when it comes to, right, the advocacy work that we're doing, what would you say are the priorities right now, and what kind of support are you looking for from what communities to speak out about what issues? Like, what's going on in your areas, what's going on nationally right now that you're working on? And I see Hans also has a comment also about trans intersection, so I can let you start again so you can head back to that, and then we can hit on that other kind of overlapping point.
Oh, well, I wanted to make sure, if anybody else wanted to say anything, because I know I already shared. But what Bria said brought up something that I thought was a really cool comment. You mentioned Saifa's work, Bria, at Intersex Justice Project, and one of the things that he posted there, like, that really blew my mind was some thought on, like, well, some intersex people, like Kirill made the comment, understand themselves as cis, like they align with the gender identity that they were born with, or that, doctors tried to put on them. But some of Saifa's work focused on, well, in some ways, intersex people inherently have trans experiences, or they're forced to have a lot of overlap, even if they consider themselves as cis. And that was something that really, like, blew my mind. Because I think that was true, at least for me.
For sure, yeah. So yeah, what are people working on? What kind of advocacy are you doing? What do you want people to know, and especially, like, trans and queer people?
I'm going to jump in. So one of the big projects I have going on right now is developing an educational program with the immigrant communities that I deal with that are new to the States. And I'm finding that it's not just like in Roma culture, we don't talk about it, but it's not just us. There's a lot of places in the world where this kind of thing is very taboo to talk about, or even bring up. And so as part of the education programs that we offer where I work. It's something that I've been really trying to get some traction with, because there's a lot of cultures where this isn't talked about, and I feel like education of the public, and especially groups we work with a lot. I mean, nobody loses in that situation. You know what I mean? It helps us with visibility. It helps people who are new to the conversation. It helps people who maybe have heard of it, but don't have really well-formed ideas. I'm sorry, I'm rambling.
No, you're good. That's super important work, especially, right, like same as an immigrant. It makes a huge difference to be able to connect to somebody who shares your experience, and you never know who you're talking to or what their experience is, because a lot of us, we don't talk about it. Yeah, what other advocacy work are people focusing on right now?
Hi again. This is Angela Carter. Again, coming from the medical community, being inside the medical community, my experience with education around intersex experience, intersex conditions was nearly zero. We got maybe 3 or 4 slides in endocrinology and maybe a couple in genetics, just a very brief mention with no details, no background, no humanization. And it's still, it's been 10 years since I was in medical school, but it's still largely the same. The education is lacking. If it's there, it's an elective. And, it shouldn't be an elective. It should be just, along with any other experience shared with medical professionals. So to that end, in the last few years, I would say that in the medical community, the concept of intersex is getting a little more attention, a smidge. There's been a big push in the last maybe 8 years to feature trans-related care. There are trans conferences all over the country at this point. There are classes that are inserted into other conferences specifically focusing on trans care, but the I is still largely silent in the medical community. And there have been in the last couple of years a few more folks trying to get education out there. I've seen it done pretty well by a couple of folks. Swedish Hospital did a conference earlier this year that focused entirely on the intersex community. So what I see is it's just beginning to become noticed, folks are just realizing that there's a dearth of information. And there's some scrambling to try and make that right in some communities. And in some communities, it's been done well. And in some others, it's been a little haphazard. And so my goal being to increase in knowledge and awareness and destigmatize the intersex community, I'm working on creating a series of trainings for medical providers on the intersex community, on the various different experiences and conditions, to eventually be shared as a continuing education video series. Don't know how long it's going to take. I'm going to try and be really thorough and include as many voices as possible. But that's what I'm up to right now.
Thank you. And I know a lot of that, smidges of visibility is thanks to some of these tireless advocates that are sitting here right now who won't stop shouting about the fact that bodies don't work the way you assume they work. Bria, what have y'all been working on? What's Interact working on right now? I know you've made some amazing strides, like literally in the last year, in terms of combating IGM.
Yeah, for sure. I'll speak on that question, and if it's okay, also talk a little bit more about the uh, broader landscape and the movement at large. Is that okay?
That is not just okay, that is fantabulous and very necessary. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. At Interact, we are currently working with students from Harvard Law to actually develop a legislative toolkit to really, help build capacity for advocates on the ground who want to do legislative advocacy and lobbying in their own communities. And so that's really exciting. And I'll also say that right now, I think we've definitely seen the movement gain traction in the past few years, thanks to the hard work and dedication of, my colleagues on this call and, the intersex community at large, and of course our allies for doing the work on the ground to educate and raise that awareness. But still, even then, I think that there's still so much work to be done because intersex bodies are still being subjected to harmful medical interventions till this day. And, due to society's archaic and quite frankly inaccurate ideas about sex and gender and how bodies are supposed to look, this year we had, as Hans mentioned, the anti-trans sports bills that are also anti-intersex kind of popping up left and right to the point where it was hard to kind of keep track. I had to have a spreadsheet just to keep track of all of the horrible legislation. And I live in Oklahoma, and I'll just say that to Pride here for the first time. And I proudly wore my intersex cape, the flag cape that you see in the background here. And even in spaces like Pride, there were people coming up to me asking me, what the flag meant. And on one hand, I, was really disappointed. But on the other, I was at least happy to offer a little bit of education, even though I found it really challenging to, give a brief elevator speech about intersex issues, kind of in passing, because that's not something I'm great about doing. But also, another thing I'll say is that because of intersex activists doing the work on the ground, raising awareness, um, we actually here in Oklahoma, just to give a shout out to Oklahoma because I live here, right? Even though we have so much work to do, I do want to shout out Elena Height, who worked on a resolution last year in Oklahoma City to successfully get Intersex Awareness Day recognized in Oklahoma City. So, that was a big deal in Oklahoma. Same thing, I believe, in Austin, maybe in Houston, and possibly a few other states. And Interact is actually working to do the same in states like New York. And we're also, you know, actually New York City, just to name another achievement of Interacts and also intersex activists on the ground. New York City was the first city to successfully pass the very first intersex education bill earlier this year. So that's really exciting. Though it would be nice to have at least some federal acknowledgement of Intersex Awareness Day. I will say that that's what we are working on right now.
Sweet. Thank you for all your work. Marissa, do you have thoughts?
Some things that I've been really thinking about and still trying to figure out how I'm going to carry them out is definitely related to healthcare for intersex people. Like, there's just such a lack of it. Even large medical centers that have implemented like an LGBTQ health program, or I'm like, wait, where's the I? like we have so many needs, and it is great that certain hospitals and clinics and doctors are implementing these LGBTQ health programs, but it's like, don't forget the I. And one thing is, if they do incorporate the I, is like, make sure it's great if they incorporate it, but they need to know how to provide us healthcare. And really, there is not a lot of, because intersex people have really most of the medical, intersex children have really been the ones to receive the medical treatment. And so now you have generations of decades of adults like myself who were subject to early intersex genital mutilation. And now because of that, we have so many, or I have several long-term specific health needs because of the complications related to the surgeries I've had. And there's just there's really no healthcare providers who have the knowledge on how to treat this or help the decades of adults who are subject to this. And another kind of passion of mine is really thinking about mental health care for intersex adults. Like there's several assessments for trauma, but for me, years went by and I was never assessed appropriately for trauma because there's oftentimes I feel like certain screenings for trauma don't incorporate medical trauma, specifically medical trauma related to what intersex people have gone through, because it often incorporates multiple facets of trauma. And another kind of passion of mine is incorporating intersex and generally LGBTQI populations into treatment for eating disorders, because there is the LGBT community in general does there are several of us with eating disorders, and oftentimes the treatment protocols for eating disorders have really been geared towards really female identified people. And so there's not a lot of sometimes the current treatments are not very effective for us. And there is a great group dedicated to advocating for intersex and trans eating disorder needs. It's Fed Up, Fighting Eating Disorders in Underrepresented Populations. They're amazing and they do so much good work. And I'm just so proud of them. And I'm really passionate about that. Additionally, as being involved with the organization Intersex and Faith, their real goal is to educate religious communities on what intersex is. And oftentimes they're really the ones that just have no idea. And if they do have heard of it, like they get the wrong idea. So often, I would say that's like my other big passion right now is kind of implementing kind of the work that Intersex and Faith has started, as well as, there's just so many things I want to work on, and I need to figure out, I'm still in the thought process of how I'm going to do this, how I'm going to do that, but I have so many passions right now, and it's just a matter of implementing them into the advocacy I'm trying to do.
Sweet. Hans, you unmuted.
Oh, that was an accident.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, no, everyone's bringing up such important stuff. I think, a lot of people think of IGM as something that's a relic of the past. While it's fully legal in the US to this day, it happens across the board. And I think something that for me as an advocate is coming up, alongside the anti-trans and anti-intersex bills that are coming up, right, is so many of them are formulated in this way that is supposed to encourage people to advocate for youth, whereas the reality is none of the people that are pushing anti-trans youth bills are also, like, they're not even touching IGM, which is hypocritical, the same way that all, of these reactionary movements are hypocritical. But I think that hits a particular way, right? And something that comes to mind for me, right, is like the entire system that discourages both communities and healthcare providers and people themselves from trusting trans and intersex people to be able to self-determine what we need is truly wrapped up and manifested in all of these cultural problems and all of this legislation, right? Where IGM is fully permissible, but trans youth cannot determine what they need. And, as an example, for instance, I was able to access medical transition without much of a problem or without any issue from my insurance company, which normally gives trans people a lot of problems unless they jump through a lot of hoops, because my provider, with my permission, used the fact that I'm intersex as the reason for my medical transition, which is a problem, right? That trans people have to jump through hoops, yet intersex people are very much encouraged to go through medical treatment that they may or may not want. Yeah, and that's something that I think a lot of us can speak to, whether or not we're survivors of IGM or not. A lot of us have medical trauma in different ways, where we walk into a space where somebody speaks with authority and gives us things or does things to us that are deeply, deeply harmful. Yeah, for sure. So we have 15 minutes left, according to the lovely Pride Center. And I guess if there's anything you want people to leave here with, like if you want to throw like a gift at people and be like, all right, walk away from here with this goodie bag of information, or here's my favorite person that you should look into, or here's someone I look up to, or remember this fact, or whatever it might be, what would that be for you right now? What would you want to share with the broader LGBTQ plus community? I can start in Connecticut right now. Like recently there was some legislation that was attempted around banning intersex genital mutilation in Connecticut. And the people who were pushing for it were they were very well intentioned, but they did not speak to any intersex people when they began pushing that legislation. And as a result, it got watered down to something along the lines of, we should do a study to see if IGM is actually harmful. And I don't think that actually passed, or if it did, I don't think anything's been done about it. But when you're doing intersex advocacy and when you become passionate, when you learn about things like intersex genital mutilation still being legal in our state and still being practiced on infants, talk to some intersex people and maybe talk to people in general about, what does it mean to gender somebody at birth? Why are you assigning anybody a gender at birth? What does that do to trans and intersex kids across the board when you perpetuate that culture? And start those conversations with us and center our leadership in that. That's my package to throw into Connecticut specifically. What about other people?
I have thoughts, if that's okay. So I think I have thoughts about what I think, if there are any like healthcare professionals listening, I have thoughts about that. I think that medical professionals honestly do a bad job of making families aware that surgery isn't the only option. And they don't do a good job of letting them know that there are peer support options available to them as well. I think that they give vulnerable parents a sense of fear and urgency by using terms like disordered and telling them that, how hard things might be if they don't do the surgery. So, they they're really highlighting the risk of delaying surgeries instead of highlighting the risk of the surgeries themselves. And also they're having all these conversations mostly with the parents and the guardians and not actually the children, because oftentimes the children are too young to understand what's happening. And I had surgery when I was 13 and I didn't really fully understand the risk of the surgeries. And doctors are still trying to prepare us to live in this society that's heteronormative, where everything is still kind of black and white and we fit into these boxes. But I would love to see some research that proves that not only do we not people don't fit into boxes, we don't belong in boxes, but also I would love to see some research highlighting like healthy intersex lives and people who like haven't had surgery and how they're thriving. um I think that there's a lot of gaps in knowledge when it comes to intersex issues. And, unfortunately, doctors are still trying to prepare us to have sex with our husbands. And I still don't understand that. Um, because I think that also there is the need for intersex inclusive sex education, right? And I also think that it's important for people to know that, there are like different ways to have a body, and we teach about like different sizes of penises, but we don't tell like kids that the like clitorises can come in all different shapes and sizes as well, and that there's other ways to have sex than penis vagina penetration. So
Thank you. Who's up next?
I'll just speak real quick. I would love to see physicians and community centers and any kind of really organization have resources for intersex people that they might care for. For example, provide your patients with links and names to Interact, Interconnect, IJP, Fed Up. Like, I think really people knowing like, oh, there are organizations out there that do this. And I think that's really important for really the LGBTQI community at large, and especially, healthcare systems. I really think, especially when families and children are first here, they're intersex, they really need connection, I think. And I think knowing there's people out there that do this work, I think is really good and would be helpful for really anyone to know. And just educating LGBTQ people in general about intersex. And I would just resources. That's what I really think that needs to be provided to people.
I want to give a shout out here locally. We have the both the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico, as well as the Black Cat Community Center, which both are working very hard locally, and they do trainings as well nationally, I believe. They're really working with some of the major health plans here in New Mexico, especially the ones that are accessible through Medicaid, to provide not just the education, but the community for intersex people here. So we're making a lot of progress here in New Mexico, where IGM is still technically legal here. There's been a couple of attempts, but now that there's really focused and concerted education going on, I think we're going to make a lot of strides here.
I'm loving what everybody's saying here. I'll jump in and just add a few more thoughts. I think the points that I would hope, again, I am medical, so I'll speak from that perspective. When working with folks who are intersex, I think it's crucial to connect folks with resources, connect folks with community. And it's also crucial to step back as a provider and realize that you don't know what this person in front of you needs. They know. They are, give that person, give every person agency and autonomy to make the decisions about what they want to do with their life. With pediatricians, if you have a gender unique child that comes to your practice, your job is to make room for that child to discover who they are and to affirm it and to create space in culture for that child to exist. It is not to convince parents that they need to rapidly make a decision about that child's bodily autonomy. It's crucial that we allow young people to make decisions about their bodies. They do know themselves. They know themselves from day one. They know what they need. And, gender is sometimes a fluctuant thing also. It is fluid for some folks. And that is another thing that needs to be welcomed. Medical care for intersex people should not be binary. It should not have a goal of fitting a person again into those boxes like Bria was talking about. I've had patients who want to take estrogen and testosterone at the same time, and that's fine. It's good. That's what feels good to that person. And so that's what you do. You construct an individual treatment experience for that person. Another really important thing to know is an intersex person who has had a life of medicalization is going to walk into your office potentially with a lot of trauma, going back to the trauma discussion from earlier. And that trauma is going to have a big impact on how they access care, whether they access care. I've had people avoid the medical community for over 10 years and not get the hormones that they needed, having had their gonads removed. And that results in a lot of physical issues. And so your job also is to try and remove that trauma as much as possible from the work that you do, and also to try and heal that rift with the medical community at large. And that takes some work. That's a lot of work, but it's absolutely necessary, to having people feel safe enough to access the care that they need. A lot of folks, because of early interventions, early surgeries, early genital mutilation, are now dependent on the medical community. They have to engage if they're going to stay healthy because they don't have hormones if their gonads have been removed. And so, they're stuck. We are stuck having to access a medical community that has harmed us. And so I think recognizing that and really honoring that is crucial. You have to understand and bring it up in conversation. You have been harmed, and I want to support you in a way that is not harmful and is conducive to you finding the life that you want.
Thank you so much. We just have a few minutes, and I want to make sure, I know, Hans, you're going to speak next. I want to make sure that people have an opportunity to go around and shout out where they get their inspiration, any shout outs that they have for other organizers whose names they want to name. So Hans, if we want to start with you with your last thoughts, and then we can go around with other people with their shout outs. Also, I love the kitty.
Yeah, just on that last question of I guess what you want to see, what the focus would be. For me, my domain is media communications. I think a lot of the projects and approaches that I'm most excited about are about emphasizing the decoupling of gender and anatomy, helping people get more of an understanding, breaking down some of those assumptions and barriers, because I think that's critical. Intersex and trans populations probably get scapegoated the most, but I think it's really a doorway to a lot of good things for everybody. And so I'm always excited about that. And I wanted to say just too that even over the course of the couple decades that the internet has allowed intersex movements to begin, seeing all the people here, seeing all of the ways in which people are taking this into different disciplines is already huge compared to even maybe 10 years ago, to have out intersex people who are in all these different disciplines of, medicine, activism, eating disorder awareness, all these different places is something to see.
Sweet, thank you. Bria.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that one, thank you all for having me, and that I get my inspiration from all of the intersex advocates who laid the groundwork for me to be here doing the work that I'm doing today, and all of the intersex people on this call. Shout out to Hans, who was my very first intersex mentor and supported my coming out process, and I am inspired by Sypha and Pidge, and of course, shout out to everybody at Interact and the next generation of intersex leaders who are going to change the world. Thank you.
Anyone else inspired by anyone?
For me, I think the most inspiring part of the intersex community is the community itself. All the people who struggle, you know, you're out there, you're not alone. You know, your case may be unique, all of ours are, but you're not alone. And it's those people out there who need that connection that I try to keep in mind when I'm doing the work.
Yeah, I think I'm really inspired by so many people, the community at large. I'm inspired by the parents who reach out for support after they just found out their young child is intersex. I'm inspired by the physicians that are trying to implement change and help intersex people access gender affirming care, and especially for adults, those of us who are kind of do have medical needs related to the unnecessary medical intervention we had as children. I'm really thankful for them and several trailblazers in the intersex movement, Kimberly Zieselman, Arlene Barrett, and Linnell Stephanie Long. I look up to them all so much, and they really created a great path.
I'll just add a shout out to the people that I have had the honor of serving as a doctor. I've learned so much from the people that I've had the opportunity to care for about strength and resiliency and my own ability to be who I am just by their example. So I'll just put that out there, and thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. I'll give a shout out to somebody I don't know. I don't know your name, but when I was I was a young kid, I was like a preteen. My mom, back in the days of LiveJournal, was reading LiveJournal and was like, there's this person in Russia, I don't know them. They're not anywhere near us, but they use they pronouns and or gender neutral pronouns, and they were born with what doctors consider ambiguous sex characteristics, and they just embrace that. And that's so interesting, right? That's someone feels comfortable. And I was like, yeah, that's wow, someone's out there and they're out. And my entire time as an organizer, I've kept that person in my mind. I don't even remember their LiveJournal handle anymore, but I know they exist back home. And yeah, that's who I want to shout out, even though I don't know if they even do any advocacy. They just had a LiveJournal. But I think we're that to everybody who's out there, whether you learn that you're intersex early on in life or you learn about it as an adult, as many people do. There's a lot of information that's kept from us. If you want to learn more about your body, I encourage everyone to do that if you're comfortable. It's always good. We're all different. We all have different needs. If you don't want to learn more about your body, that's also okay. That's the beauty of body autonomy. You can try to find out as much or as little as you want. And the center is going to be sending along a bunch of resources out on social media that these amazing advocates have compiled for y'all's edification. If you're like watching this and you're like, I don't even know what intersex means, even after like watching this entire panel because you didn't like define it, we're going to have some resources for you to read. And yeah, I don't know if anybody else has any parting words, but thank you so much for speaking and for being here. And y'all are amazing. Keep doing what you're doing.